Free practice 1 and 2 are in the books, and we finally have real data to work with. Get this lineup right and you're set up for the high-scoring sprints after the break. Let's break down what we've learned from free practice, the Mercedes front wing drama, and my top F1 fantasy lineups for the Japanese Grand Prix. Let's dive right in with free practice 1. The big story here is that McLaren leapfrogged Ferrari as they look to rebound from a double DNS in China. Mercedes were comfortably out in front in P1 and P2, while Max Verstappen couldn't break into the top 6 drivers once again. We saw a few drivers struggle for grip around Spoon in the session. Leclerc and Russell had some dicey moments there, but it was both racing bulls that went completely off the circuit. Moving down the grid, Alex Albon made contact with Sergio Perez, but it was just the Williams that suffered minor damage, and both drivers went on in FP2. Moving on to FP2, this is when Oscar Piastri started making some believers in F1 fantasy. P1 for most of the session, followed closely by the Mercedes duo. Lando Norris missed the first part of the session due to a hydraulic leak, but he ended FP2 in P4 with the Ferraris right behind him. Still no luck for Max Verstappen in FP2, so if any of you are using Limitless, you should start thinking about a McLaren driver to round out your team. This was another tough hour for Arvid Lindblad. He reported an issue in the opening laps of the session and was never seen on track again. Gabriel Bortoleto was also marooned in the garage until the final 10 minutes and couldn't quite lock down the pace of his teammate Nico Hülkenberg in P7. Moving on to the latest betting lines, one big movement here is the 2 McLaren drivers. After their FP1 heroics in China, Vegas barely moved their 2 lines, so seeing both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris move up here tells me that there is some real pace in that McLaren. They're now just under the Ferrari duo, and if I had to pick between Piastri and Norris at this point, I'd pick the Australian driver. So if you're considering Limitless, I'd use this as a menu for the top 5 drivers: Russell, Antonelli, Leclerc, Hamilton, and Piastri. If you're enjoying the video, make sure you like and subscribe, and consider becoming a member of our channel to get exclusive content and all of our strategy videos before anyone else. We wanted to give a shout out to our newest channel member, NBA Enthusiast T7R. Moving on to the top F1 fantasy headlines of the week, we had some early concerns about rain disrupting qualifying and impacting Limitless decisions. But the forecast for Saturday has dropped to just a 10% chance of rain, with a fully dry Grand Prix expected on Sunday. There's no reason to consider no negative here, especially with wetter weekends still to come. And for those of you planning to use Limitless, the weather isn't a concern for me anymore. Now, there was also some drama this week around Mercedes' front wing. Per the 2026 regulations, the aerodynamic elements of the front wing need to close within 400 milliseconds. But footage from China showed that Mercedes' front wing closed in 2 phases. The first closed within the required time, but a second part of the wing took extra time to close. So rival teams asked the FIA for a clarification, and on Thursday, Motorsport.com and The Race both reported that the FIA will not be taking action against Mercedes, since the issue appears to be a hydraulic effect, and Mercedes have claimed that this issue won't come back up in Japan. This means that there's no impact to George Russell and Kimi Antonelli as they look to continue their hot start to 2026. Now it's time to answer some questions from our viewers. The first one comes from S. Sluski. Why do we want to use Limitless on a sprint weekend? Sprint weekends are often held at circuits with more overtaking, so the scoring gap between Limitless teams and teams that don't use a chip isn't as big. At tracks like Monaco, overtaking is harder, so the top Limitless teams score over 130 F1 fantasy points more than regular teams. When we look at Japan, it had the second fewest overtakes on the 2025 calendar, and Limitless users this weekend are hoping that history repeats itself. Also, since several teams gain between 2 and 3 million in value in China, running Limitless allows you to score lots of points and take advantage of your previous team's cost cap gains. The second question comes from Palomir2947. How is the cancellation of Bahrain and Jeddah going to affect the fantasy F1 meta? So we're going from Japan to 2 straight sprint weekends in Miami and Canada. Since the top constructors tend to score 50 to 60 more points than Tier B constructors on sprint weekends, I expect a lot of teams to converge on a meta lineup sooner than ever. So Mercedes and Ferrari lineups with either Antonelli, Leclerc, or Hamilton for the 2x boost are going to be popular once we get back from the break. That means we need to consider our cost caps and available transfers this weekend to set the table for the meta lineup. Now remember, if you haven't joined our featured league on F1.com, now's a great time to do it since we're almost up to 25,000 teams. Now speaking of leagues, Formula One informed us this week that the McLaren Mini-League is ending in Japan since Bahrain will not be taking place as scheduled. So if you used a big chip in China, I'd use another one in Japan to try to take the win in the first mini-league of the season. Let's check in with our tier rankings for this week because we had a few changes after FP2. Max Verstappen and Red Bull both moved down to the cell category since their pace is still uncompetitive and I don't quite trust them yet, even though Max has a great history at Suzuka. Oscar Piastri moves up to the fence, but that's only for those Limitless teams. He's still going to lose 0.3 million unless he scores 66 fantasy points, but it's looking like the Australian could easily crack the top 5 drivers. Moving on into Tier B, Alpine look a bit slower than the likes of Haas and Racing Bulls, plus they cost almost twice as much, so they drop down to the cell category. Arvid Lindblad is still a buy for me, but I'd take his teammate Liam Lawson over him at this point in the weekend. He struggled on track in FP1 and was hardly even on track in FP2. And for that reason, I'd also take Haas over Racing Bulls for their reliability. Now here are my top F1 fantasy lineups for Japan. If you ran Ferrari with a Tier B constructor and a mix of Mercedes and Ferrari drivers at the top of your team, I still really like them for this week. Racing Bulls and Haas are all locked to gain 0.6 million, and Mercedes still look as dominant as ever. Now with Arvid Lindblad's struggles, I've swapped Liam Lawson into the first and third teams on your screen. And now that the middle team is triple Racing Bulls, that's a lot of exposure to a team that doesn't look totally informed this weekend. So you may want to swap Leclerc for Hamilton to try to get into either Esteban Ocon or the Haas constructor. Moving on to the long-term meta, I think a lot of teams, including mine, will look something like this for Miami. Now, we mentioned earlier how much more Tier A constructors score compared to Tier B, and with back-to-back sprint weekends, you're definitely going to want all of those points on your team. If you have a Tier B constructor, I'd keep them for one more week for the sake of those cost cap gains, but if you have a Ferrari Mercedes lineup now, I wouldn't turn over your whole team just to switch it back over in Miami. Lastly, for Limitless, there's one big change here. Oscar Piastri moves into the 5th spot in place of Max Verstappen. I'm seeing some early betting lines for the fastest lap in the Grand Prix, and Piastri cracked the top 3 in those latest betting lines, so there's some trust from Vegas that his one-lap pace is for real. Terry and I will be back to answer all of your questions 1 hour before lineups lock. The action begins right here on the FanAmp YouTube channel at 1 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. in the UK. Thanks so much for watching.